Hey, hey. Good morning. How you guys feeling? Awesome. Just slow clap the intro. I like that. Just kind of, all right. Good morning, everybody. Glad you guys are here. I'm a little amped up with caffeine this morning. So it's going to be awesome. Hey, everybody out there on Facebook Live. We just switched over from Periscope to Facebook Live. So if you are never in the room with us for whatever reason, just pull up your Facebook feed. You'll probably get a notification. If you're not a fan of the church page, go to facebook.com/epicbaltimore, and you'll see us pop up there. So everybody, I think we had like 13, 14 people when I was coming out. Just say quick hey to everybody out there. So let's put our hands together. Thank you, everybody, for coming. So welcome. Part 3 of our series called Christian. It is not what you think. We've been digging into this idea and have come to the conclusion that the term Christian really isn't all that helpful because we can define it, redefine it, misdefine it in any way that we choose to. You can be a Christian and frankly believe whatever you want to. We've been discussing this tension between Christianity and Christ, or being a follower of Christ and professing some type of religion. Last week we looked into the parable of the Good Samaritan, and we noticed that the Samaritan, he actually quit Christianity for all intents and purposes. He was bound by the same rules that the other two guys ahead of him were bound by, and they used those rules to kind of go around that the guy that was half dead in the street. But this Good Samaritan, he actually chose to quit. He chose to lay aside those rules and do what was the right thing. Not just be right, because there's a difference in being right and doing the right thing. You know, you could be justified and still be wrong. Like, you can do the right things and still be wrong. And so we looked at the Good Samaritan as a way for us to, possibly for some of us, to quit Christianity and perhaps maybe start being more like Christ. Last week we left this challenge to quit being a Christian and start living like Jesus. I heard this quote recently from Steve Jobs, who is not a leader in morality by any stretch of the word, but in his biography, he mentions this tension between Christ and Christianity, and he said it this way. He said, "The juice goes out of Christianity when it becomes too based on faith rather than living like Jesus or seeing the world as Jesus saw it." This is a prevailing thought in much of our culture. When people look at Christians, they say, "That's great, you guys have a really strong belief in this particular thing or these set of rules and values, but much of your life doesn't look much like Christ." And for a lot of us, we can say, hey, we're not perfect. You know, Christians never claim to be perfect in any way. We're just we're forgiven, you know, so that kind of gives us some breathing room there, maybe a little bit of an out. But there's some truth to this matter when we base our religion solely on what we believe, that we adhere to this list of rules, and then we have an opt-out clause for everything else. There's going to be a little bit of tension there. And so I think Steve might have been on to something. The term Christian and all of its spin-offs and derivatives only appears in the scriptures 3 times, and it is never something that someone calls themselves. In fact, it was a derogatory term that the community around the Christian church would call them. There was this knockoff Jewish cult, you know, spin-off Jewish cult. They followed this guy with the last name they thought, Christ. And so they said, we'll start calling you guys Christians. But it was something that they never called themselves. The title Christian has no biblical definition. The term Christian has no qualifiers or disqualifiers. We've learned that a person, a Christian, can believe, vote for, profess. They can post on social media. They can own. They can essentially do whatever they want. And there is nothing in Scripture that will change it, because Christian has no biblical definition. And so we've been digging beneath the surface a little bit, and we found that the first century believers, the followers of Christ, they referred to themselves not as Christians, but rather as disciples, which is a terrifying term, which we've been reiterating because it's very clearly defined. The job description for a disciple is pretty lengthy and pretty hefty. We've come to learn that Christian has something to do with what a person believes, but a disciple reflects a way a person behaves. Our key verse in John 13, we've been looking at the past few weeks. Jesus' last command, he pulls all of his guys together. One last lesson. He's hours from the cross, and he says, look, guys, I'm going to give you one more command, one more thing that I want to reiterate to you. In John chapter 13, verse 35, around there, he says, look, just as I have loved you, I want you to love one another. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. not Christians, that you are my disciples, my pupils, my learners, my followers, the people that have been walking after me. The single greatest qualifier of a disciple or a follower of Jesus should be their love for one another, and it should mimic Christ's love for them. So we've been looking at this and saying, man, what would happen? Imagine what would happen if we never quit on this thing of love. How would things have changed? What would the church look like? How would our communities and our region and the world and our countries change if Christians, if believers, if disciples never gave up on this thing called love? If we didn't quit love, how appealing would it be to follow Christ? It's going to be hard. I mean, we can't paint this as an easy thing, because we'll get into in a couple of weeks from now, Jesus said, yeah, if you're going to be my followers, you have to, give up everything, die to yourself, and take up my cross. That's not really a great marketing plan. That's not a great marketing strategy, right? Hey, you want to follow me? Just kill yourself, daily, and you can join the group. Most people are going to say, nah, I'm out. I'm okay with that. But if we never gave up on love, how much more appealing would it be to follow Christ? That's how we're supposed to treat each other, as Christ has treated us. Now, about 40 days after the cross, Jesus is about to ascend into heaven. Now, we don't have time to get into that, but I always get frustrated with myself when I just kind of reference one of those weird things in Scripture as like it should be normal. Yeah, Jesus just floated into the sky as like a balloon that a kid let go. That's weird. I just want to call it, can I just say that? I have no other point other than saying I'm not pretending like that's normal. Can we all just be on the same page? Okay. Right before Jesus floats off into the sky, he pulls his guys together one more time, and what we've learned is this is called the Great Commission. So he gives them kind of, this is your job to do after this. What you should be doing is loving one another, but how you are meant to do it, he gives us in this Great Commission. Matthew chapter 28 is where we find this. This is the box you are to check. This is what you should be doing, and how you're to do it is by loving one another. And so Matthew 28, starting at verse 19, he says it this way: therefore go and make disciples, not Christians, again, we got to remind ourselves, go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. By the way, baptism's coming up. Anybody not been baptized in here? You want to do that. Man, it has been a blast, right? Can I get a what from anybody who's been baptized? What? It's been great. So you want to do that. Anyway, small little plug for baptism in there. Baptizing them in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. Anybody in the social media world ever stumble on some Pinterest fails? Or maybe you were a part of some Pinterest fails. Pinterest is like, hey, here's a picture of what can happen. Now, therefore, go and make this yourself. And it doesn't always work out, right? There's a try at the minion. Why has he got two eyes, right? Anyway, they missed that one. Here's another shot of some baby Christmas pictures. On the right, or on the top, you have what should have happened. In the bottom, I like the one that, he's like, just done. I'm done. We got one more. Here's a family photo. On the left, you'll see how it should have looked. And on the right, how it really turned out. It's pandemonium, You can't see her face, but the girl on the right-hand side up at the top there, this is like beauty shot time for her, right? She's like just kind of laying it out. Well, this is kind of how I feel about the Great Commission. Jesus gave us this picture. Hey, I want you to go make disciples. And what the church has done, by and large, has been a large Pinterest fail of making disciples with people. Not that I'm a Pinterest expert or a disciple expert, but for many of us, and we talked about this last week, a lot of us have had the history of, hey, the church has hurt me in the past, or I've witnessed this type of hypocrisy in these people, or a pastor had failed, or maybe there was this money issue, and it just turned me off from the whole thing. We had this picture of what Christ laid out for us, and when we went and attempted to make it happen, we ended up with a poor example of our attempt at what this was. Well, when you go into the Great Commission and the wording here, and we've been digging a lot into the original language to get to the heart of these things, we find that the word, or two words in our English language, make disciples, is really one Greek word, mathetuo. Mathetuo. And it doesn't mean what we think, or how we translate our English word to make. It means to cause someone to want to be. It means to cause someone to be a disciple. Make in our English language is very forceful, or at least in our Western culture. You know, you probably have had a boss make you do something, right? If I don't have those reports by close of business, don't come back on Monday, right? You know, I'm going to make you do that. Or maybe you've made your kids do something at the house, like you will take out the trash, or you don't have a phone, or you're not going out, or you're not playing Xbox, right? I mean, this is how we get people, we make them do things in our culture. I think the application, or this Western idea of making someone, is the equivalent of our Pinterest fails at the Great Commission. We've attempted to make people disciples in the way that we make other people do things around us, through force and imposition and threats. Hey, you better be a Christian or else. We leverage something other than the tool that Jesus gave us, which was love. This is how you are meant to do it. The real words that Jesus gives us is a more difficult attempt at it, but it's to go and make someone in the fact that you want to cause them, you want to inspire them, you want them to want to follow Jesus. Disciples are not made by force or imposing our will or using power or politics in any way. So the correct definition of this Great Commission would sound something like this. So look, now I want you to go and cause others to want to follow, and teach them to observe or attend carefully to, or stay on the path of the things that Jesus taught. Now, for the first 300 years of the church, we got this right. We leaned nothing other than love to make this happen, and we caused people to want to follow. It was difficult during the first 300 years of Christianity. There was a lot of persecution, a lot of death, a lot of things that were happening at the time that were very difficult for the church to handle, but it was the only thing that they leveraged was love. Well, about 300 years, the Emperor Constantine, he made Christianity the official religion of Rome. Now, this is not all a bad thing. It was a great sigh of relief for these Christians, because he gave religious freedom to the empire. Hey, you can worship however you want to, whoever you want to, but the official religion of the empire is going to be Christianity. So now Christians could come out of the shadows. They had no fear of being punished and persecuted and killed and maimed. And there was this political, or this scorn as a kind of a popular thing for people to look at Christians as a lesser group of people. Now Christianity had some authority, and so they came out of the shadows. It wasn't all a bad thing, but a byproduct of Christianity now having the power, it started to poison the church's original commission, and thus started this Great Commission fails. Instead of leveraging love like Jesus commanded, Christians started to leverage political power and military might and actually corruption when you started to get down to it. And so this is how the church began to interpret this Great Commission. They changed the meaning, if you will, and it started to read like this: therefore, go and impose my teachings and values and worldviews on all nations, threatening them with judgment and destruction if they don't obey everything that I have commanded you. Did anybody have their Jesus brought to them in this manner? Like, if you don't believe right now, you're going to go to hell. Or if you don't believe right now, the rest of your life is going to be terrible and miserable. Or if you don't do what Jesus said you're going to do, then you and I can't be friends, or you don't belong in this household. There's a time where Christians took this as the Great Commission, but this produces a failure, if you will. Going out and imposing and threatening rather than causing someone to want to be. Inviting people to become followers is very different than imposing Jesus' values on people. You and I have been called to invite, to cause someone, to inspire, to win them over. Paul the apostle, who comes after Jesus had died, but it's during these apostle period, and he comes to follow Jesus, and he goes out and starts all these churches. Great story I even have somebody message me this week just to talk about Paul a little bit. Maybe we'll get into that later on in the series. So Paul writes to one of his churches that he started in this church in this area called Corinth, and he tells him his game plan to live out this great commission. 1 Corinthians 9:19, this is his game plan. This is how he's going to do what Jesus commanded them to do. He says, look, though I am free and belong to no one, Paul made sure he stated that. He was a Jew. He was also a Pharisee. He was a learned man, but he was a citizen of Rome. So he had all of this political freedom. He had all these political rights. And he says, look, I'm a free man. I belong to no one. But even though I've made myself a slave to everyone, he didn't use his title or his freedom or his power or his brilliance or his education to trick people into wanting to follow Jesus or having to follow Jesus. He didn't power up. He didn't level up and use some power to leverage his way. He actually stepped lower. He decided to be a servant. And for what reason? He says, I've done all these things to be a servant to everyone, to win as many as possible, to win people to Christ. Anybody ever won anything? Like a client or a business deal, you know, you went and you had that meeting and you laid out all of your stuff and you won them over. How did you do it? You didn't threaten them. You made your product or your business more attractive than the competitors, right? Even if it was a cheaper price or more value, however you did it, you cast a vision that, hey, this with me is going to be better than that with them. You won them over. And they said, I like what you're selling. Sign me up, right? Or maybe your significant other. How did you win them over? You made your future with them more attractive than their future with someone else, some busted old ex-boyfriend. He can't handle me, right? I mean, for real, we got the shredded filter on the lights today, you know? I just do stupid stuff. Sorry. We'll keep moving. You didn't threaten that person. Hey, you will marry me or else. That wouldn't have gotten very far, you know? I mean, other countries, maybe that's how it goes, you know? Or, hey, you will sign my contract. You will go with my services or else. It would have said, well, you could take your services and do something with them, you know? Didn't work that way. You cast a vision. You said, hey, our future together is going to be better than our future apart. You didn't win them by force or imposition. To threaten, pressure, and impose does not equal win. When we read the Great Commission, we see make, and we figure that means I got to do everything in my power to make them, force them, impose upon them my will to get them to sign up for this. If I have to threaten them, I will. But threaten does not equal win or to cause or to inspire. Many people have resisted Christianity because we have threatened and pressured and imposed rather than cause or compel or win. We've opted to leverage something other than love, and we've taken a step backward. Anytime we, as Christians, disciples, followers of Christ, leverage anything other than love, we move backward in our influence. Let me repeat that. If you don't remember anything else today, I want you to remember this. Anytime we leverage anything other than love, we move backward in our influence. The New Testament opted for win rather than impose. In the 800s and 900s, there was this group of people, these nations in the north of Europe, northern Europe. They were a frightful, scary bunch. They were called the Vikings. Anybody ever heard of the Vikings? They were a tough group of people, very, very hardened warriors. Conquer was their number one goal. Rape, pillage, plunder, that was their aim. That's what they did. And they moved down from the north into the southern regions of Europe, into England, Britain, Germany, France, some of those areas. They moved down. And as they spread out and conquered different places and different lands, they came in contact with other religions. They were a very pagan people. They believed in the god Thor. It's where our Thor character comes from in the Avengers. It's sort of a knockoff of what the Vikings had believed. They started to come in contact with other religions as they moved south, and namely Christianity. There's an English scholar named Alcuin. He wrote of this Viking raid on a monastery in Lindisfarne in 793. He said, Never before has such terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race. Nor was it thought possible that such an inroad from the sea could be made. Behold, the church of St. Cuthbert, splattered with the blood of priests of God, despoiled of all its ornaments, a place more venerable than all in Britain has fallen prey to pagans. The Vikings were a very terrifying group of people, and the gods that they worshiped, these pagan gods that they worshiped, were warring gods. And so to war was to mimic what they valued and what they worshiped. And so they would move down in these people groups, and warring and conquering was what they did. It's how they honored the gods that they followed. To most people, the Viking nation would be thought of as the last group of people to be brought to faith. They were so hardened of heart, and the actions that they gave, that they lived out, was so the opposite, the complete opposite of what Christian values really were. The god of war, their god Odin, would never be conquered by the Prince of Peace. But he was. Some of the Viking kings would be won to faith as they would move down into the areas of England. They would be won over to Christianity, and they would return to their Scandinavian homes, and they would force people to be baptized. They would say, "You will be baptized or die." And this was somewhat normal to a group of people, right? Because it was all threats and violence. You will be baptized. And so some people would, but a lot of people would resist. They would say, "I'm not following that God. It's not, that's not who I am. That's not what we believe." People would resist because the Viking people would resist this and say, "That's not how we're coming to faith. This is what we believe." Some missionaries would be sent up into areas of Sweden and Denmark and Norway, and the local people would call meetings to see if they would allow these people onto their lands. One such meeting was recorded of one of the Viking elders possibly witnessing a miracle by this man I want to tell you about. He was quoted as saying, "The God of the Christians is greater than Thor," which was monumental in this community, in this time, this culture. They were allowed passage, and they came in with freedom to witness to the Viking people. One such missionary was a guy named Angar. He would later become the archbishop of the area. His successor, his right hand, is a guy named Rebert. They would not win the Vikings by force or by threats or by imposition. They would win them, cause them. They would inspire them to follow Christ in a different way. A way of love, a way of self-denial, a way of service, a way of Christ. And it was said about this guy, Angar, he said his whole life was characterized by rigid discipline and self-denial. He wore haircloth shirt by day and night. In the earlier part of his life, he measured out everything that he ate or drank, and he chanted a fixed number of psalms morning and evening. He would sing psalms as he labored with his hands and chant litanies as he dressed or washed his hands. And 3 or 4 times a day, he would celebrate Mass. It goes on to say, of all that he received, at once he gave a 10th part to the poor. Every 5 years, he tithed his income afresh. Wherever he went in his diocese, he would eat nothing till some poor persons had been brought in to share his meal. During Lent, he would wash their feet and distribute amongst them bread and meat. Angar, who was born of Saxon parents in the northern part of western France in around 1800s, he was described as a sensitive child who led a devout life. He experienced visions and dreams and possessed, and the Viking people spoke of him and said, a combination of humility, self-forgetfulness, and an undaunted courage and an energetic initiative. Because the Viking culture was so different from that of Christian values, it would take centuries for Christianity to permeate the Scandinavian world. But it did. And it didn't happen through threats and imposition. It didn't happen through, you better, we'll be stronger than you. Jesus will kill Thor. It was done through humility and servanthood. And a life like Angar and his friend Rebert almost single-handedly turned one of the most violent, barbaric, and powerful cultures into followers of Christ. And they didn't make them. They caused them to want to. They inspired them. They saw these two people walking through Scandinavia, washing the feet of poor people. They would say, what are you doing? These people have nothing they can give you. They said, well, this is the way of Christ. They say, you're giving your food away to people that haven't earned it and haven't deserved it. You can conquer them, make them your subjects. And they said, no, that's not the way of Christ. The way of Christ is to serve them. It blew their minds. They'd never seen anything like this before. One by one by one, the Scandinavian world came to follow Christ. It was done through winning, not imposition. What if you and I decided to leverage nothing other than love in an attempt to win someone to Christ? That was our only tool. That was the only thing that we stepped out and used, was to love someone to Christ. What if we laid down our self-importance? What if we decided that threats wouldn't actually win someone to Christ? What if we lost the battle so that we could win the war? What happened if we focused less on winning our Christian fight and instead winning the fight of Christ, which is the hearts of mankind? The fight where he laid down his life, where he became a servant to all, where he gave up his rights so that others could have a right to salvation. A few weeks ago, laid out this vision for the church for the next couple years. We dubbed it 2K20, just using the numbers that feel like God's leading us into a place where we want the church to grow to 2,000 people in 2 separate locations by the year 2020. And if this is going to happen, which I believe it is, I'm having so many conversations and meetings with people and lunches, we've been talking and just dreaming and crying and thinking, man, God's going to do this. It's going to be beautiful. If this is going to happen, it's not going to happen by force. It's not going to happen by me getting a microphone on this big stage and in front of millions of people and saying, you must, you will, if you don't. No. It's going to happen by us as missionaries, leaving this room, serving those around us, loving those around us, inspiring people to the way of Christ, causing them to want to follow. I don't know who that guy is. He doesn't do things the way that other people do. I don't know who that lady is at the end of our block. She's kind of an odd bird. I don't know where she come from, where she works, what her thing is all about. But there's something about it that I'm drawn to. Maybe conversations will happen in your company like, hey, you know that guy who works on the 5th floor? He's kind of always to himself. What's his deal? I mean, he's kind of like an odd dude. It's nothing like physically that really makes me want to be inspired about them, But I look at his life and I say, man, he's one of the most generous people I've ever seen. He's the kindest heart I've ever known. He gave me his parking spot one day when I was pulling in, and he went to park somewhere else. And I was like, that's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Like, I thought he was leaving, and no, he just went somewhere else so I could have a closer spot. How weird what's his deal? That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? It's just a parking spot. It's just a nice word. It's just a hug or a handshake. It's just a smile. An entire culture was won to Christ through love and servitude. Let's forfeit all of the other junk. So this is what we're going to do. Our streets will be changed. The crime in our city will decrease. The racial divide in our city will be reconciled by nothing other than the love of Christ coming out of you and me. So let's do it. As we, disciples of Christ, leave this place, follow our commissioning, head into the world with a charge to cause others to want to follow Jesus. Not through imposition, but through humility, through service, by leveraging love and nothing else. So here's our challenge. Started this series with the challenge to go out and find someone to love. Many of you guys were singing Jefferson Airplane for a couple weeks after that. Don't you need somebody to love? I just wanted to reinforce that and make sure you guys sing it for another couple weeks. This week, in that spirit of love, I want you to find somebody to serve. And we're going to demonstrate that love through our service. Here's a fact. I don't know your life. I don't know where you work and the people you're around, but you won't have the time to serve them. Guaranteed. There'll be something on your calendar that demands something of you. You'll be able to do something more productive than serve that person. You'll get so much out of that thing that you're about to push aside. I guarantee it. It's a fact. We have to make an intentional effort to push it aside and to serve that person. You'll need to make time. You'll need to pretend what life is going to be like if I give this thing up and let them have it. We have to give into the fact that you may look like an idiot serving this person. Other people are going to look at you like, what's that all about? You trying to holler at her, dude? Like, aren't you a married guy? It's like, no, it's my pastor, told me I had to. You'll look like a dummy, I'm sure. I think Jesus looked kind of dumb, kneeling down, washing the feet of his disciples. I mean, he was God in the flesh. I think Paul probably looked pretty stupid too, right? An educated man. He was free in all accounts, all sense of the word. He walked around saying, no, I'm a slave to everybody. I believe Ansgar looked pretty dumb too up in the Viking world. All of these people could have murdered him on the spot, and many of them tried. But instead, he would kneel down and wash the feet of people that had nothing to their name. Probably looked pretty silly. So that's my challenge. I want you to find just one person. I would love you to have more than that, but let's just start at one. Find one person to serve. I don't know what it looks like to you. Maybe cutting grass for someone. Maybe helping them at work in some way. But love is how you and I are going to change the world.